There's a saying among World War II veterans: you never forget the sound of a .50 cal. American soldiers would fire bursts that thundered across the battlefield, echoing for miles. The distinct thump-thump could shake the ground and pierce the air with fear. To German infantrymen, this sound meant one thing: exposure meant death. Even if you were behind cover, the .50 cal's sheer penetration power could chew through walls, sandbags, and vehicle armor. Panzer grenadiers recalled bullets ripping through half-tracks as if they were made of paper. The Luftwaffe pilots also came to hate it. American bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress bristled with M2s on every side, in the nose, tail, and turrets. When German Messerschmitts or Focke-Wulfs tried to attack, they faced up to 13 guns per plane, spitting hundreds of rounds of .50 cal shells at blistering speed. Many Luftwaffe pilots described attacking American bombers as a suicidal mission after 1943. In the skies over Europe, the M2 became the line between life and death. German pilots once called the B-17 the porcupine because it bristled with .50 cals in every direction. The Luftwaffe learned the hard way that diving through American bomber formations was like flying into a metal storm. The M2 bullets tore wings, pierced engines, and shattered cockpits. One German ace, Franz Stigler, recounted seeing his comrades' planes shredded mid-air by American guns long before they could even fire. It wasn't just the damage, it was the hopelessness. The M2's range and density of fire made American bomber formations almost impregnable. Even heavily armored aircraft like the WW1 stood little chance when facing 20 bombers firing hundreds of rounds per second. But on the ground, the M2 was an even greater terror. Mounted on jeeps, half-tracks, and tanks, it gave American infantry unmatched dominance. A single M2 could stop a truck convoy or tear through an entire squad of German soldiers hiding behind walls. In Normandy, paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne used M2s to pin down German machine gun nests from shocking distances. The Germans, used to dueling with rifles and MG-42s, quickly learned that the M2 didn't play by the same rules. Even their light tanks and armored cars were vulnerable. The M2 was so feared, the German officers issued specific orders to locate and eliminate any American unit equipped with the gun before an assault began. What made the M2 truly terrifying wasn't just its power, it was its psychological impact. German soldiers called it the Kampfwagenzerstörer, the tank destroyer, even though it technically wasn't one. The myth grew larger than the weapon itself. Soldiers claimed it could cut men in half, punch through steel doors, or shoot down planes in seconds. Whether these stories were exaggerated or not, they achieved something powerful: fear. The U.S. Army often mounted the M2 visibly atop vehicles, not just for tactical advantage, but also as psychological warfare. When German soldiers saw that unmistakable long barrel gleaming in the sun, they knew the Americans were close, and they knew retreat might be the only option. By late 1944, the M2 had become synonymous with American might. It was reliable, deadly, and omnipresent. From Omaha Beach to Bastogne, from Sicily to Berlin, the 50 cal roared wherever Americans fought. Even when tanks broke down or artillery failed, a single M2 could hold a position. Some GIs nicknamed it Ma Deuce, treating it with almost sacred respect. German intelligence intercepted numerous reports describing the M2 as a superweapon, and frontline troops began improvising countermeasures. Thicker armor plates, reinforced gun shields, even sandbags welded onto vehicles. But none of it truly worked. The M2 could still tear through. And when the Germans finally faced American aircraft strafing their retreating columns, the hatred turned to helpless resignation. The 50 cal's bullets rained down like metallic hail, accurate, unstoppable, merciless. Even after the war ended, captured German soldiers admitted their fear of the 50 cal. In POW camps, interrogators noted how often the weapon came up in conversation. One veteran of the Waffen-SS reportedly said, "The 50 was not a machine gun. It was death itself." That legacy endured. The M2 didn't just win battles, it changed warfare. Its design proved so timeless that it remains in service today, more than 100 years since its invention. Few weapons in history have inspired such dread and respect from both enemies and allies alike. For the Germans of World War II, it was more than just a machine gun. It was the sound of defeat. As the Third Reich crumbled in 1945, the M2 .50 caliber machine gun stood as one of the symbols of Allied dominance. In the final months of the war, German troops retreating across Europe dreaded the sound of American P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs screaming overhead, their wings bristling with Browning M2s. Each strafing run turned entire convoys into flaming wreckage. The power of the .50 BMG round was such that even tanks, if hit in exposed areas, engine grills, observation ports, or tracks, could be disabled. It wasn't uncommon for German survivors to describe these attacks as metal rain. The Luftwaffe had lost control of the skies, and the M2 was one of the reasons why. Every American aircraft, from bombers to fighters, carried them, and the Germans knew that if they heard that distinctive rhythmic roar from above, survival was unlikely. One of the most chilling accounts came from the Battle of the Bulge. During the freezing winter of 1944, American troops used M2s not only for defense, but for offense in ambushes. German tanks like the Tiger and Panther were nearly impervious to rifle fire, but the infantry supporting them wasn't.
American soldiers learned to target exposed crew, radio operators, and drivers with devastating precision. Even the Tigers, mighty as they were, became vulnerable once their supporting infantry fell. A burst from an M2 could clear entire tree lines, suppress snipers, and make even veteran German soldiers duck for their lives. Some reports from the 2nd Panzer Division describe entire counterattacks collapsing after sustained .50 cal fire pinned units in place. It wasn't always about killing. Sometimes fear itself did the job. The moment the M2 opened up, morale broke like glass. When the war finally ended, Berlin lay in ruins. But among the wreckage, Allied engineers and soldiers shared one universal opinion. The M2 was here to stay. The Germans had produced engineering marvels, the MG-42, the Panzerfaust, the V-2 rocket. Yet none matched the M2's combination of simplicity, longevity, and sheer power. German weapon experts captured after the war reportedly studied it closely, astonished that such a heavy weapon could be so reliable across every climate, from the deserts of Tunisia to the snows of Belgium. They admitted, somewhat bitterly, that the Americans had created something industrial, efficient, and eternal. For many German veterans, their hatred wasn't just born of fear, it was born of respect.
The war ended, but the M2 never stopped. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the same Browning .50 cal guns that had cut through Nazi lines were once again firing, this time against waves of Chinese and North Korean troops. The Germans, watching from a defeated continent, could only marvel that their old enemy's weapon still dominated new wars. Reports from Korea told of the M2 mowing down entire assaults, its tracers streaking across frozen hills like fiery comets. Tanks used it for defense. Aircraft used it for attack, and infantry still carried it atop tripods. The M2 had not only survived, it had evolved into a universal tool of war. By the time of the Vietnam War, a new generation of soldiers had inherited the same weapon, almost unchanged since World War II. Mounted on helicopters, patrol boats, and bunkers, the .50 cal once again earned its terrifying reputation. North Vietnamese soldiers came to recognize it instantly, just as the Germans once had. In the dense jungles, its deep thunder rolled through the mist, cutting through trees and tearing through ambushes. The Germans who had fought against it decades earlier would have recognized everything: the sound, the devastation, the fear it spread among enemies. It was as if the ghost of World War II's battlefields had returned in the tropics. It's worth asking, why didn't Germany make something similar? They certainly tried. The Germans had powerful 13mm and 20mm aircraft guns, but none were as adaptable or as reliable as the Browning M2.
The MG-131 was an excellent aircraft weapon, but far too delicate for ground combat. The M2, on the other hand, could survive mud, snow, and sand. It could be repaired with a wrench and a hammer. It was heavy, yes, but it always worked. German officers admitted in post-war interviews that they envied that American philosophy to build something simple and unstoppable rather than over-engineered and fragile. The M2 embodied what Germany couldn't mass-produce by 1944. Practical perfection.
By the end of the 20th century, the M2 had transcended its mechanical nature. It became a symbol. Every war film, every documentary, every American soldier's memoir included the sound of Deuce hammering through battle. In World War II, it had been a source of hatred for German troops. By the modern era, it became the sound of dominance, the assurance that the United States carried the biggest stick in the fight. Even modern German forces in NATO later adopted weapons inspired by its concept. Large caliber, long-range machine guns for multi-purpose combat. Ironically, the weapon they once feared became part of the doctrine they would later share as allies. In every museum and memorial across Europe, you can still see the M2 standing tall, mounted on Shermans, jeeps, and bombers. It's more than steel and gunpowder. It's a relic of human ingenuity and endurance. The Germans once hated it because it represented everything the Americans brought to war: relentless industry, overwhelming firepower, and an unbreakable supply chain. But today, historians and collectors worldwide, including Germans, respect it as one of the greatest weapons ever designed. The hatred faded, but the awe remained. The weapon they once dreaded became part of the shared story of the 20th century. Even now, in modern battlefields from Iraq to Afghanistan, the M2 still roars. Over a century after Browning's design, it continues to defend convoys, bases, and aircraft. Its sound, that same deep, rhythmic thud that once made German troops dive for cover, still echoes in distant valleys. Few weapons in history have outlived the men who first feared them. Fewer still remain unchanged in form and function. The M2 is one of them. Its story is more than a tale of war. It's a story of endurance, innovation, and legacy. As the screen fades to black, imagine standing on a quiet European field where the echoes of that war still linger. Somewhere beneath the soil lie the shells of .50 cal rounds fired 80 decades ago. Silent reminders of the weapon that changed everything. The Germans hated it. The Allies revered it. But in the end, the M2 became something even greater. A testament to human engineering that bridged generations of war. If you enjoyed this journey into history, the story of fear, innovation, and firepower, make sure to hit that like button.
Subscribe and ring the bell for more cinematic war stories. Every week, we bring the forgotten legends of World War II back to life.
It was late 1943 on the Western Front. A bitter wind cut through the Ardennes forests as German soldiers huddled in their foxholes, listening to the distant hum of American bombers. They had heard stories, rumors really, of a monstrous weapon mounted on American jeeps, tanks, and aircraft. A weapon so powerful that it could tear through trees, light armor, and even concrete walls. Its sound was unmistakable, a deep, rhythmic thud, 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 like a mechanical heartbeat of death. This was the American Browning M2 .50 caliber machine gun, and to many German soldiers, it became more than a gun. It was a nightmare they couldn't escape. Officially known as the Browning M2 HB, heavy barrel, it fired half-inch bullets at nearly 900 meters per second, sending heavy metal projectiles capable of shredding vehicles and men alike. The Germans called it the anti-everything gun, because whether it was aircraft, infantry, or vehicles, the M2 could destroy it all. The M2 wasn't born overnight. Its origins go back to World War I, when legendary gun designer John Moses Browning began working on a weapon that could fire a bullet large enough to pierce aircraft armor. The result was a weapon that fired the powerful .50 BMG, Browning machine gun round, a cartridge that dwarfed almost every other small arms round of its era. When the Second World War began, the U.S. military equipped it with everything: trucks, tanks, planes, ships. From the frozen Aleutians to the deserts of North Africa, the M2 was everywhere. Its versatility made it an icon of American firepower. By 1942, every German commander on the front lines had heard of it. Reports from the Africa Corps told stories of American jeeps turning entire platoons to shreds from hundreds of meters away. The Germans were used to rifles, submachine guns, and MG-34s, but this was artillery that could be carried by men.